Hey everybody, welcome back to the podcast, Our New Narrative. This is Andre Davis, and today I'm presenting episode 5 of a series that I call Things I Wish I Also Learned in February. And today's title is Shocking Revelations About What the Forefathers Said About Blacks. The purpose of this episode is to address some misconceptions about our founding fathers, the nation's founding fathers, and their attitudes toward blacks back then. In a previous episode, I presented evidence of free blacks, being able to vote to ratify the Constitution. And so basically, this is kind of going contrary to the common narrative that, our founding fathers were a bunch of racist slaveholders. They didn't care about black people at all. So with that said, I would like to say people are a little bit more complex than that. And we shouldn't judge people who lived in the 18th century with 20th century morality or 21st century morality. But anyway, I'll be quoting Jefferson and Madison today, and I will be getting the information I will be presenting to you comes from a book called The Impending Crisis of the South, which is behind me on the screen. And it was written by a very interesting man named Mr. Hinton Helper, a very, very, very influential person in the history of America and Black America, someone you've probably never heard of until you clicked on this video. But he wrote the book, Impending Crisis of the South. He was a former slave owner who denounced the institution of slavery, not necessarily for the slaves. He was more concerned with the plight of the poor whites in the South, a story that is never told in America, but I'll do it. So he wrote this book. It's full of facts that contradict that narrative of cotton is king and, blah, blah, blah. So one of the best books I've ever gotten my hands on. It's in the public domain. It was written in 1857, which means it's free for you to download, or you can buy a hard copy on Amazon and whatnot. But I definitely strongly advise you to get a copy of a book that was once banned in the South. 3 people actually got hung for having possession of this book. So that if that doesn't intrigue you to read it, I don't know what will. And you can Google that. So I'm getting this information from that book. And of course, what I'm reading from Jefferson, you can find anywhere. But here we go with Jefferson. And forgive me, this is old language. So some of these words, I'm just going to fill in the blank because we never use them now. And I want this to be as simple as possible. Okay, so quote, the abolition of the domestic slavery is the greatest object of desire in these colonies, where it was unhappily introduced in their infant state. But previous to the enfranchisement of the slaves, it is necessary to exclude further importations from Africa. Yet, our repeated attempt to effect this by prohibition and by imposing duties which might amount to prohibition, have been hereto defeated by His Majesty's negative, thus procuring the immediate advantage of a few African pirates to the lasting interest of the American states and the rights of human nature, deeply wounded by this infamous practice. So here we see Thomas Jefferson saying, look, in 1619, that ship that rode up on our shores was a Dutch war vessel. And, we didn't need slaves back then. I'm putting words in his mouth here, but we didn't need this. And every time we tried to get rid of this, His Majesty vetoed it, right? So he's just pointing that out. And in the original draft of the Declaration of Independence, of which it is well known he was the author, we find this charge against the King of Great Britain. Quote, this is Thomas Jefferson again. He has waged cruel warfare against human nature itself, violating its most sacred rights of life and liberty in the persons of a distant people who never offended him, captivation and carrying them into slavery in another hemisphere, or to incur miserable death in their transportation thither. This warfare, the abhorrium of infidel powers, is the warfare of the Christian king of Great Britain, determined to keep a market where men should be bought and sold. He has at length prostituted his negative for suppressing any legislative attempt to prohibit and restrain this commerce. Okay, so again, this was in the original draft of the Declaration of Independence. That obviously is not in the one we have. But it would have been nice to know that our forefathers were trying to say, look, we don't want slavery. We don't need this in our new nation. It is contradictory to everything we believe, freedom, self-responsibility. And so here's evidence that they were trying to present to the world, basically, like that we're not being contradictory. We have been trying to get rid of this institution, but the king wouldn't let us. Now, what happened after that, when you have to form a nation, obviously you have to compromise. People in the South were totally relying on slavery. So in order to form a nation, they had to make that compromise, and they hoped that by 1808, slavery would die out. And I'll present more evidence on that subject matter later. But I'll go back to Thomas Jefferson, where we hear him further saying, this will sound familiar to everyone. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers for the consent of the governed, end quote. So yeah, if you listen to the original draft of the Declaration of Independence and what went into the Declaration of Independence that we have, sounds like he's talking about, when he says all men are created equal, it sounds like he's directly addressing blacks, where when I grew up, I was kind of told directly or indirectly that we didn't count whatsoever. So again, contradicting the narrative. Now, reading from another section of The Impending Crisis of the South, we have more information from Thomas Jefferson. Okay, so here we go again. From the book, throughout the South at this present day, which was 1857, especially among slaveholders, Negroes are almost invariably spoken of as goods and chattel, property, human capital. Right? In our first quotation of Jefferson's work, we have seen that he spoke of blacks as citizens. We shall now hear him speak of them as brethren. He says, quote, we must wait with patience the working of an overruling providence, and hope that this is preparing the deliverance of these our brethren. When the measure of their tears shall be full, when their groans shall have involved heaven itself in darkness, doubtless a God of justice will awaken to their distress. Nothing is more certainly written in the book of fate than that this people shall be free, end quote. So that's from Thomas Jefferson, the guy I grew up knowing only as a founding father who owned slaves and was a racist. Obviously, there's more to it to that. I can go on for a while about why he kept his slaves, something to do with manumissions, and the fact that if you let free your slaves, where would they go? They'd be better off under his protection, but I digress. Now, we'll go to Madison and the Constitution. Out of the same book, Ron Hinton Helper's book, The Impending Crisis of the South. Quoting from the book now, the Constitution of the United States contains the following provision, quote, no person held to service or labor in another state under the laws thereof escaping to another shall, in consequence of any law or regulation therein, be discharged from such service or labor, but shall be delivered up on claim of the party to whom such service or labor may be due. End quote. Now now I'm going back to the book. To the studious attention of vandals who contend that the above provision requires the rendition of fugitive slaves, we respectively commend the following resolution, which, it will be observed, was unanimously adopted. So he's addressing, now this is 1857, when you had a lot of, right leading up to the war, and you had the fugitive slave law out there, and people were trying to rely on the Constitution in that verse that I just presented as the legitimacy for the fugitive slave law. And basically, that was BS. And he's presenting his evidence on it. And I'm quoting now. On the motion of Mr. Randolph, the word servitude was struck out and service unanimously inserted, the former being thought to express the condition of slaves, and the latter the obligation of free persons. You can find this in Madison's Papers, Volumes 3, page 1509, if you want to look that up. So that's it for today. Now remember to check out the website with the link with the website to the link that'll take you to a website that will provide you with information on organizations around the world currently trying to fight against slavery. And until next time, have a good one, and I'll talk to you soon.